Welcome to Breaking the Standard, where we are closing the communication and knowledge gap for the small business government contracting industry. I'm Aubrey Gainford, and today we have a very special guest with us, Dolores Kuschina Messina. Dolores, welcome.
Thank you so much.
I'm really excited to have you here, and if you could just introduce yourself for our listeners, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Dolores Kuschina Messina. I am the Chief Disruptor at Rexata Solutions. I've been in contracts for almost 15 years, anywhere from commercial to international contracts. I've done it. I absolutely love it, and I would say that I think one of the things that makes me unique is I wanted to do government contracts. I didn't just fall into it. So it was something that was my passion, and I really enjoyed and wrote my dissertation in the area. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share some more about the topic and also to finally, get to know Breaking the Standard. This is so exciting.
No, I've been following you for a while, and I need to read your book because she actually published a book a couple months ago, which I haven't gotten a chance to read yet. But I will link all of her information and more information about Rexota as well. But today we're going to be talking about what is under the contract hood, so to speak, and to not be afraid of it. You and I were chatting the other day when we were trying to decide what we're going to talk about. And I feel like under the hood was like the perfect like analogy or a way to like explain contracting because I think a lot of people just think, oh my goodness, it's so overwhelming. Like I don't even want to open it and look at it.
Yeah.
So what would you say when you look at, from like GovCon and from contracting, is the first thing that small businesses like should know or need to know when it comes to understanding like the contract world?
Yeah, no, great question. So if I can, do 2 points.
Mhm.
The first one is to know how to read the contract and what it means to you and when to leverage your legal versus just leveraging your business sense. And then I would say that my second tip is that when you're dealing with contracts, know that it is the most critical piece in order for you to establish your negotiation power. So knowing what value you bring and understanding why this person wants to contract out with you is one of the first things that you have to be aware of and have to be able to not only define, but be able to substantiate when you're having the negotiations. Without that, I feel like you're willing to accept whatever terms in order to get that business. And as a small business, and I've been there too, you're like, well, I can make that adjustment or I can try to fit into this mold. And you start losing your own value from that.
Mm. That's so important to think about. And I think it kind of leads perfectly into my next question, because for a lot of small businesses, regardless of if they're just starting or they've had like a couple of contracts or they're a sub on something, understanding contracting can be like very overwhelming and immensely scary. And
Mm.
so, like, if you were to break it down for small businesses so that it's not scary, like, where would you suggest they start? And I know you said understanding the contract and everything, but if you were to take a step back from that and have them start, where would you suggest that they start? Because I'm sure a lot of companies look at this and go, I look at a solicitation and go, what is this? Like, what am I
Yeah.
doing? And so, and for if you're listening to this, the whole purpose of this conversation is so that you don't walk away from the solicitation, that you take a step back and then you go, okay, and then, go through what, Dolores is going to go through with you, but like, don't throw it away. Like, just because it's, unknown or, overwhelming or scary doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just, it doesn't
Mm.
have to be perceived that way.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's a great place to start, right? Is your solicitation because that's your first entry level, other than your capture and all of the efforts, all the discussions you've had. This is where it's like your time to shine and responding to the solicitation as a small business. So for anybody, it is terrifying to go in and download a document, open it, and see 268 pages, and then you have to figure out, am I supposed to read this to cover to cover? I've been there when I was first starting out in this space. I opened the company I was working for, our recompete. It was like a 300-page solicitation, and I sat there and I read it cover to cover,
What?
and I was like, I have no idea what I'm reading, right? Which is, I feel like that's an emotion that we all sense, right? Like we open a solicitation, we're like, What is a CLIN? What is section B? What does section C mean?
Mhm.
What am I looking at deliverables? And for people that have been doing it for a long time, it's easy to rip through it, right? It's easy to be like, all right, let me go straight to section L. Can I respond to this? Am I compliant? Let me look at section M. How are they grading me? Let me make sure I understand. You know that if you take out the instructions, you take out the evaluation criteria and the reps and certs, that's essentially your contract. So you should be writing your assumptions, your clarifications based on everything before section L.
Mm. Mhm.
That's what experienced people do, right? People that are just starting out, they're like, I'm just trying to figure out how to get some funding to to like show that I can perform. It's terrifying, because you're looking at this long document, and solicitations don't have that, it takes 45 minutes to read. They don't have that hint. So you print it out or you look at it on your computer and it stresses you out. So my first tip is learn from experts, learn from people that are giving you that guidance, and you don't necessarily have to pay for it. Look for free advice, look for free guidance. LinkedIn is a great resource. But the first thing you do is open up those instructions. It'll tell you everything that you need to know to make at least some type of bid, no bid decision, meaning, are you going to go forth with this? And are you going to respond to it? If you're a small business and you see, for example, there are things in there that there's no way that you can comply with, then don't spend your time submitting to it. Um, you know, push it aside, say, hey, maybe I can get on a subcontract later if you don't have any partners or you don't have time to find partners. And put it to the side and say, okay, I need to understand what these requirements are, so that I can bid on this work later. But for right now, I do not have the capacity. You do not want to be in a place where your net is so wide that you're responding to every solicitation that hits your desk. You will kill yourself doing that. You will burn out. And with being a small business, everything else that you have to do, you're going to
Mhm.
fry. Like, it's
Mhm.
just going to be trouble. The next thing that I would say is understand as a small business which clauses apply to you. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because you have to know the federal acquisition regulations if you're doing a traditional procurement contract, or you have to know what is the regulation, what is the statute that's governing a non-traditional procurement contract, which is like your other transaction authorities, some of your co-ops, your grants, things like that, that aren't necessarily subject to the FAR. So understanding that piece is the hard part. That is the part where even the large primes struggle to really get. And that's because you have to read it. You have to understand which one applies. And then you have to understand all the waivers. You have to understand what applies to a small business, a commercial business, what applies to Department of Defense, what applies to Homeland Security, what applies to Department of Energy. They all have supplements. So you have to be able to break all that down. But don't dive into all of that. If you look at the solicitation, you're like, I can't bid this. I don't have a cost accounting system. I don't have a certified cost accounting system. Push it to the side. If that's a requirement that you have to have, don't bid on it because you're going to have trouble meeting those compliance requirements from the very beginning. Also understanding the requirements. That's an easy one. Most small businesses, you're the expert, you're the engineer, or you're the researcher that's leading the business. If you don't understand what the requirements are saying and you're past that question and answer part of the solicitation, then maybe you shouldn't bid that either. If you don't understand what it says, you don't want to waste the government's time reading your proposal that doesn't meet the mark, and you don't want to waste your time writing a 60-page technical to something you don't even quite get. That's also like getting it off to the wrong foot, right? So in the very beginning, that's an issue. But it all starts with reading. It all starts with reading and understanding how to dissect it. And it's the same way when you get to the contract. Ooh, just got bright here. Ah.
It looked like a big light coming. It's a shame I don't show the video because she just had a huge light. Like she literally went completely, the whole screen just was a big white light.
I know the sun came out and was like contract. Um, but yeah, when you get to the contract, it's the same thing. You start with reading it. You start with your statement of work. Do I understand what I'm going to be doing? Does it match what we agreed to? Leave the legalese stuff, right, to your contracts team or your legal representation. Leave that to them. So like all your limitation of liability, warranty, intellectual property clauses, you should read it. But you making sure that you can do the work is key as a small business. Your legal representation or whoever as your consultant can help you with the legalese piece and the clauses and things like that. But you should be able to know if you can execute. And again, with your contract, before you start redlining it or before you sign on that dotted line, you have to read it. So I think it all starts with those few steps is like, can I do it? Have I read it? Do I understand it? If you answer no to any of those, then you should question whether or not you should proceed.
I think that's a really great way to look at it, in like like the flow chart with the arrows. Like if you say
Mhm.
no, then you go over here. And, it's okay to not understand something, and I've had people on the show and we constantly talk about this. You're not going to be able to be good at everything. So
Mhm.
will be things that either you don't understand or you don't know how to do it. That doesn't make it bad or wrong. That's just not your niche, you know?
Yep.
So sometimes you might have specific agencies or one specific requirement that you're going after, and then something else you might just be interested in. But I didn't realize until I started doing the show and I've gotten to interact with as many people as I have in the community, how much money and time really goes into writing a proposal. Like
Mhm.
even taking the time to determine, do I have the people to even work on this and go after it? And then, am I willing to accept that loss if I don't win? So I
Mhm.
think it's brilliant. Reading, you'd be surprised how many people don't read,
Yes.
um, which baffles me. But yeah, so reading it, I think is great. The government doesn't always get the statement of work or the PWS completely right. So
Mhm.
you as industry experts, including yourself, you can read that and go, well, is this what you meant? Or, maybe like, was this more of what you were looking at? Because there are times when the government doesn't always know, we're not industry experts. So I think that's really smart. And then I think 15 years in, I will say the FAR never seems to get any easier. It's just constantly, you have to look at, okay, what is this really saying? And, bouncing it off of somebody else. So like, I interpreted it this way. Is this how you interpreted it? Because this is how this is how I'm understanding it. And when in doubt, go to an attorney.
Yeah.
Because I always go to my contract procurement attorneys and I'm like, I'm interpreting it this way. Is this how you're interpreting it before I reply? And they're like, no, no, that's how we see it. But I think that's really great advice. Do I understand it? Am I able to, to perform it? And like, if you can't, if there's nothing wrong with saying no. So I think that's
Right.
absolutely brilliant. And so that leads me to my next question. In your opinion and in your experience in this industry, is there a right and wrong way like to do things in contracting?
I think you have to understand the flavor when you're doing, especially when you're negotiating. It's really a test of your relationship and negotiations, whether you're doing business to government or you're doing business to business. That is really your first test. If you are not able to communicate well and you feel like you're hitting a wall every time, it should be an indication of how the rest of the relationship may work. It might be a personality thing, right? But it could also be you escalate it, you meet the other people, you escalate it, you meet the next people. And every single time it feels like you're pulling teeth. We've all had this negotiation, right? Where you're like, oh my gosh, can we just agree on this one thing? Like, why is this so hard?
Hmm.
That should be your first clear sign. So to me, always negotiations is the best way for you to test a relationship. And you can do it from business to business standpoint, especially for small businesses. Finding the right relationship is so critical, especially if you're looking at mentors that are in the business world. If you're looking for working with primes or other small businesses, do small projects to test it. Like, do you guys get along? Do you work well? Um, so I would say in the negotiation stage, the right way to do it is you test a relationship of how you communicate. Two is when you are negotiating and you're redlining or you're making recommendations of changes to the contract, be able to explain why you're making that change. Some of them you don't have to explain, right? Like if you're changing your address, you don't have to necessarily be like, The reason I'm making this edit is because, you can just say, here's our updated address or whatever it might be. But if you're making changes where you're proposing language, you should make a comment and say, this is the reason why we're changing this language. This is how we view it, and be very strategic in how you're explaining it. Nothing is worse than getting a contract with a bunch of red lines and you have no idea why they were made. You don't know the position, you don't know what the argument was, or like there's a bunch of cross hatches across clauses and you're looking at it like, I don't understand why you're crossing this out. And you get down the line and you find out, oh, they're a commercial services company. Of course, why didn't I just issue them commercial terms to start with? So things like that, the right way to do it is definitely have that backup as to why you're negotiating the way that you're negotiating. And on the flip end, when you're responding to those comments, make sure that you're very clear why you're rejecting, accepting, modifying. I've seen return comments that are like, we don't accept. Why? What is the reason, right? Is it the number of days? Let's say, like in the notifications clause, you don't like that we asked for a 10-day notice. Maybe you want a 5-day notice. Push back, tell us what you want. So that's another thing. The third big tip that I would say, and I'm like into threes today for whatever reason. The third big tip is for the contracts team to really have a good relationship across all of the departments in the company. The reason for that is because negotiations will go so much smoother. There's a way for you to leverage your programs team, so contracts can be very firm on their position. Programs can think about, how do we document some of this? How do we work around some of this risk internally so that we can provide contracts of support that they need? Accounting can also come in and say, okay, well, it's a small business. They're not able to have all of the 25 fields that we want on an invoice. Are they able to maybe do it this way, right? You are able to work around and make some of these exemptions for them. Additionally, you can also have a strategy across the team. So if, let's say, and I've done this before, where me as the contracts person, I have a directive from my general counsel to hold firm on a specific clause. And that clause is very important, but we know you have leeway on another clause. And so you say, okay, how about we do this? If you can just accept, because I can't budge on this clause, but we can make adjustments to this other clause and accept it as is if you're willing to make that as a negotiation. And if you have your programs team on the call, they can talk through, why does it make business sense? Oh, hey, well, maybe we can do it this way. And you can have a better conversation with the client. Because once you're in that like butting heads mode, it is very hard to get out of it. So those have been the biggest mistakes that I have seen, where one, you're not testing the relationship. Two, you're not providing justification for why you're commenting, rejecting, or accepting. And then the third one is people not having the relationship where contracts, like you said, like you might not have the complete statement of work or the complete performance work statement when you're writing the contract. Well, that's not very helpful to you as a contracts person, because how are you supposed to mitigate risk without that piece that's very critical? So being able to have those relationships is going to be really important.
Have you found or seen in your experience that, you know, having that rejection and that backup has led to it being rewritten or going more in the way of a company versus not providing that information, and then basically they're kind of held to the fire of either being required to sign or walk away?
Yeah. So a good example would be, there was, I'm trying to think of like a really, really good one that I've seen across the board. I'll use this one because it's my favorite. Okay. So we were negotiating, another transaction agreement. And in this agreement, there was this pesky FAR references that kept popping up, and DFARS references, which is the Defense Supplement to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is what DFAR stands for. And so these clauses are not supposed to be there. It is the nature of other transaction agreements is that they're not subject to the Federal Acquisition Regulations or its supplements. So this agreement was just like sprinkled with them, right? And you could tell it was a standard template that the company had used before. And this has happened in multiple negotiations where like there's just this clause that just gets shoved in there and nobody remembers that it's there. And so we pushed back. We said, hey, based on, the statute of other transaction authorities and the nature of them, there should not be any FAR or DFARS clauses in here, like throughout. And I marked every single one. I was like, and in my top comment, I put, I will highlight all of the other references for you, just so that we don't miss one. And on the other side, they came back and they rejected it. They said, well, this is how you work with the government. You have to have these clauses in here. And I said, okay, great. Can we hop on a call and discuss this or can we have, my legal and your legal have this conversation? Because we're okay with if these are direct flow downs from the government, this is like a subcontract relationship. What we're not okay with is if this is your standard template and you just have these clauses in here. And about like 2 weeks went by and we get a response. If you're willing, to accept the prime flow downs, we hadn't seen them yet. We will take out all the FAR references. And I was like, yes, please, because there was like 4 pages of FAR references that were also attached to it. Which, it happens. We get very busy. So it's like you get the pressure. Man, I can tell you how many times I've been like working through a contract and, a VP comes over and they're like, can you get this out today? And you're like, I'm sinking. But yes, we'll try. And it's like Friday at 4 o'clock and they're like, it has to go out today. So you're rushing through it. You just want to get it out the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we forget that on the other side, that might be happening too, right? So while we're sinking, the other person might be sinking too.
Mm-hmm.
And both ends, we're trying to protect the company. We're trying to do what's right. So having that explanation also provides the other person backup to go to their leadership, like, and say, hey, this looks like it's not just like them saying they can't comply or they're just redlining all of our FAR, DFAR clauses, or, or whatever supplement might be referenced in there, that they're basically saying like, this is a statute thing, like this has to go. Because if you cross it out, it's just as easy as them to say reject it and then put it back in.
Right.
So
Right.
it starts a conversation and you're
Mm-hmm.
able to have that conversation. Another example is had a clause negotiation where the company kept rejecting our red lines. And this was a few years ago, and there was not really like enough explanation. It was just like, hey, based on our review, we've decided to reject this because it goes against company policy. And I was like, okay, well, that's not enough information because it's not my business to ask you what your company policy is, but it is my business to understand why we're rejecting it. So we hopped on a call and I ended up talking through it. And what I understood is and it was a dispute resolution clause, which is typically where a lot of like negotiations happen too, because you want to get things over with. If someone's not performing as a prime, your risk is I'm going to be getting crappy work. And I don't want to continue getting crappy work. I want to get good work. So I want to get the dispute settled as quickly as possible. So I know, do I terminate? Do I keep going? Do I pay? Like, what is my next action, right? Because we move fast and, in corporate America, we don't sleep. Every day, everybody's working 24 hours a day, pretty much, if you look at how our businesses are run. So, so I got on the phone and I said, great, I think what we're really looking for is, depending on what the dispute is, we have enough time to actually resolve it, but we have the right people in place. So if there's a delay, because let's say someone's out of office, that's not something we can control. We want to make sure that we're able to, and we went down the line of different scenarios. And so what we agreed to is that we would leave the language as is, and we just added like, or as both parties agree in writing, email is acceptable. And in our negotiation file, we both put in there that, we both agree that if there's a dispute, we will make sure we will first agree on the timeline to the dispute resolution. Yes, we could have had that in the contract, but it would have taken like an act of the CEO to approve this thing in order for it to move forward. And it was the last clause. Like, it was nothing that really needed to like hinge the entire signing on. especially when the two contracts people were able to determine that. Documented it through email, documented in the negotiation file, got it signed, saved it in the file, and we're able to move forward. So there's a way of you to work through this so that you're not just butting heads or just fighting over whose red line is right and whose is wrong.
Hmm. Those are such great examples, and it's helpful to know that, you might not always get a yes, but at least it might lead to something else being altered or added to help make you feel more at ease before you sign. Because once you sign, that's it. Like you signed it. So if you come back later, it's like, but I don't like that. Well, you signed it. So,
Yeah.
you lose a lot of that. I feel like you lose a lot of that like initial power once you've signed it, and then there's something that you don't like or you want to change, because then that leads to a whole other conversation. So you've given so much great advice, but I ask everybody that comes on the show the same two questions. So if you were to give small businesses, just starting out, or small businesses that are already in the government contracting industry, advice, what would you say?
I would say no. I would say one, know your negotiation power, know what value you're bringing to the table. Be able to understand partners that you're working with, if they're really there for you to grow and to help you grow and to grow together, or if they're just there for their small business plan, for lack of like a better way of saying that. And then the next thing I would say is this is not a scary place. The government space is not right for everyone, and you don't have to be a prime to be successful in the space. Some company strategies is just to be a sub and
Mhm.
forever be a sub.
Mhm.
Because there's less risk, you're able to work more fluidly, you're able to work on other projects that, might benefit you. So understand what your entry point is and who you want to work with, and then understand how you want to work in that space. A lot of people just like, they will enter, I've seen a lot of small businesses are like, I just want to work with the Department of Defense. And I'm like, but these projects are also being worked on state and local. They're also being worked on in the Department of Health and Human Services. They're also being worked in Department of Commerce. Like there's a lot of projects that are interagency as well. So there's things that people need to expand their mind on. And yes, everyone wants to work with the Department of Defense. They have the biggest budget. They're the sexier client, right? Everyone wants to be cool and be a defense contractor.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of benefit in being able to provide your services through another agency, because a lot of agencies right now are working with the Department of Defense. So I would say those would be my two big pieces of advice.
Great. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
You can message me on LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest way for most people. If not there, you can just email me. You can email info@rexata.com, or just go to the website and there's a contact me page over there. So whichever one you prefer. I know everyone has their different flavor, but if you do message me on LinkedIn, I'll probably provide you my email and cell phone number so that we can, discuss things, schedule a call, whatever you may need.
I will make sure to link all of Dolores's information in the show notes. And if there's anything that we talked about today that you have more questions for Dolores or for myself, and if there's a topic that I haven't talked about that you're dying for me to cover, just shoot me an email at breakingthestandard@gmail.com. Make sure to go check us out on Apple and Spotify, and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, bye.